Hello, my name is Charlotte and I am 30 years old. My official business card states that I am a financial analyst at one of Chicago's largest investment firms, where my days are measured not in hours, but in stock quotes, reports, and the impassive numbers on liquid crystal screens. But behind this strict facade of an expensive suit and flawless calculations lies another story. The story of how I ended up completely alone in my own apartment, having severed the last thin threads connecting me to my mother and sister. This was my conscious and hard-won decision, one I do not regret a single drop, no matter what half of my distant relatives, whose faces I barely remember, whisper behind my back. My childhood was like a path through a thorny bush, where every branch left a scratch. Dad disappeared from our lives when I was barely 12, leaving Mom alone to cope with 2 daughters, me and my younger sister Madison, who was only 7 at the time. It was then, in the sudden silence that settled after his departure, that a simple truth emerged with painful, crystalline clarity. Mom had a favorite. For Madison, every new season meant bags from Nordstrom, smelling of freshness and money, while my wardrobe consisted of clothes bought for pennies at a thrift store. I wore them until the fabric literally fell apart at the seams, unable to withstand the burden of endless cycles of washing and wear. Madison's world was filled with music and color, a fashionable dance studio downtown, piano lessons with the best teacher in the district, painting classes at the community center, everything her heart desired. My world, however, shrank to the corner store, where, as soon as I turned 14, I began stocking shelves and scrubbing floors after school, earning through such bitter labor money for the most basic things, notebooks, pens, and meager school lunches. My triumph, graduating high school with a 3.8 GPA and the coveted letter of partial scholarship to Northwestern University, was met by Mom with cool reserve. She sat me down at our old kitchen table, the very one at whose polished surface I had struggled alone every evening with integrals and derivatives, while she, leaning over, patiently explained the basics of algebra to Madison. "I'm proud of you, Charlotte," she said, her gaze sliding somewhere past my face, directed at the landscape outside the window. "But I can't help with the remaining part of your tuition. I need to save for Madison's college." At that moment, my sister was only 13, and her university entrance was a full 5 years away. But apparently, her hypothetical future education weighed incomparably more on my mother's scales than my real and already achieved one. So I took out my first student loans, a heavy burden on my shoulders, $40,000 that would take years to pay off. My university years blurred the boundaries between day and night in my memory, turning life into an endless marathon of survival. From Monday to Friday, my alarm clock rang at 5 a.m., tearing me from brief sleep. By 6, I was already behind the counter of the campus cafe brewing coffee, so that later, from 10, I could rush to lectures. Evenings belonged to the library, not only to books and notes, but also to working the information desk, a shift that ended only at midnight. Saturdays and Sundays dissolved into extra shifts at the coffee machine and monotonous freelance data entry work, which I scrounged for with difficulty on the then still slow internet. My constant diet was ramen noodles, which I ate 5 times a week, and peanut butter sandwiches, recurring on my dinner table with dreary regularity. At the same time, Madison's Instagram feed was filled with photos from shopping weekends with Mom. She effortlessly showed off a new iPhone, while my only connection to the world was a battered 2008 flip phone, whose screen was barely visible in the sunlight. After graduating, I got a job at Baxter Financial Group with a starting salary of $65,000. Most of my peers would have celebrated such an event by allowing themselves some significant purchase, but not me. I found the cheapest apartment I could find in the city, a studio in Austin on the west side, in a building where the elevator worked reliably, perhaps, every other time. At night, its humming merged with the intrusive buzz of the radiator, creating a surreal soundscape. The walls were so thin that I could make out the dialogues from my neighbor's television word for word, and strange, yellowish stains seeped through the ceiling, the origin of which I didn't dare investigate. but the rent cost me only $600 a month, and that was the only thing that mattered. I kept both my weekend side jobs, doing freelance analysis and substituting as a barista at that same cafe whenever the opportunity arose. Every cent I earned went into savings. I kept a meticulous spreadsheet tracking the movement of every bill. For work, I wore the same set of 5 outfits, rotating them in sequence and replenishing my wardrobe only with secondhand finds when the old clothes became completely unusable. I had no parties, no dates, nothing that required any financial expenditure. Colleagues inviting me for happy hours heard polite but firm refusals. They probably thought I was a strange, unsociable loner. They didn't understand that I had a goal, a single, all-consuming one. For 8 long years, my life adhered to this harsh routine, and when I finally saved up 20% for the down payment, $76,000, I bought a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. There was nothing special about it, but it was in a good, solid building with a concierge at the entrance and round-the-clock security. All its appliances worked properly, and the windows, which was a real miracle to me, closed tightly and securely. The 15-year mortgage was $1,800 a month, but with my salary, which had by then grown to $85,000, I could afford it. On the day I was handed the keys, I walked into the empty, echoing living room, sank onto the cool parquet floor, and cried, quietly, without sobs, weeping out the years of deprivation and hard work. Mom called a week after I moved in. Her voice sounded sweet and cloying. "Congratulations on your little corner," she said, deliberately emphasizing the word little, imbuing it with a shade of something insignificant and almost shameful. Madison, by the way, says Lincoln Park has become somewhat questionable lately. You know, you could save a fortune if you just move back in with us. Madison and I have plenty of space here. "Thank you, Mom, but I'm quite fine here," I parried, feeling myself boiling inside. "Always on your own. You've always been so stubborn, haven't you? Well, I hope you won't be too lonely in that apartment all by yourself." That should have been my first warning sign, but I dismissed it at the time, attributing it to her usual maternal rhetoric. 3 months passed. The phone rang at work. It was Mom, and she was crying. But not quietly and restrainedly, but loudly, hysterically, almost sobbing with such dramatic sobs that they seemed not entirely genuine. "Charlotte, we have a catastrophe," she exclaimed as soon as I held the receiver to my ear. "Our landlord raised our rent by $500, and Madison lost her job at that boutique. We won't be able to stay here. We'll end up on the street, do you understand? On the street!" Something clicked in my head. A cold, sharp clarity, honed by years of calculations, momentarily pushed aside pity. "Mom," I said calmly, and my voice sounded alien even to me. "What about the college fund for Madison that you were saving so diligently, the very one that was so important you couldn't help with my tuition? It just vanished," Mom stammered, and familiar, rattling notes of sacrifice sounded in her voice. "Madison really needed some things, absolutely necessary. Things," I repeated expressionlessly, and the word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Later, from snippets of conversations and accidentally seen bank statements, I managed to piece together the mosaic. Those things turned out to be a grand but utterly failed attempt by my sister to become an Instagram diva. $30,000, a sum that once seemed like an unattainable dream to me, was easily spent on professional photography equipment, designer outfits, crocodile skin bags, incredible high heels, and, the height of absurdity, on paying for a social media manager for a full 3 months. The only tangible result of this financial madness was 2,000 indifferent subscribers, scrolling indifferently through her carefully retouched photos. "We just need to stay with you for a while," Mom continued, and her sobs seemed to gain strength, becoming louder and more theatrical with every second. "Just a little bit, only until we recover and get back on our feet. We're family, Charlotte, and family should always help each other, shouldn't we?" I wanted to say no. Every nerve, every particle of my being, forged by years of deprivation and hard labor, screamed at me, forcing me to utter that simple, resolute word. But her sobs, like sharp blades, cut through the silence, and an ancient, bone-deep sense of guilt did its dark work. Inside me, the teenage girl in worn-out clothes, who still desperately craved a drop of maternal approval, won out. "Okay," I said, and my own voice seemed treacherous to me. "But it's temporary, a maximum of 3 months." They moved in with 2 cars packed to the brim with belongings, as if they were transporting not modest possessions, but royal regalia. I cleared out the second bedroom for them, naively thinking that mother and daughter could share it without problems. I even bought an air mattress, trying to show some care. However, in less than a week, my once impeccably organized apartment turned into a battlefield swept by a tornado. Madison, with an air of nonchalance, occupied my own bedroom, the master one with its own bathroom and walk-in closet, stating that she needed space for her creative process. It turned out she was now aiming to become a beauty guru on YouTube, and according to her, she vitally needed the specific lighting that came from my window for creating content. She didn't even bother to ask for permission. She simply dragged all her belongings in while I was at work. Returning home, I found my neatly folded clothes on the living room sofa. Mother, meanwhile, took the second bedroom, citing her bad back that wouldn't withstand sharing with Madison and certainly not sleeping on the sofa. "I'm over 50, Charlotte," she said reproachfully. "I need a proper bed. You're still young. The sofa will suit you just fine." And so I found myself in the role of an exile in my own home, forced to sleep on the sofa in an apartment for which I faithfully paid $1,800 every month. However, the situation continued to spiral rapidly downward. Madison behaved as if these were her personal quarters. She brought crowds of friends over without notifying me, and sometimes their noisy gatherings dragged on until 2 a.m. on weekdays, when I had to get up at 6 a.m. I would return from work and find strangers in the living room, heartily eating my food and drinking my wine. When I tried to express my displeasure, Madison just rolled her eyes with exaggerated irritation. "God, Charlotte, they're just my friends. Stop being such a recluse. Maybe if you had friends yourself, you'd understand how fun it is." She rummaged through my things with a sense of absolute entitlement. My expensive face creams, which I had saved up for months to buy, she used with a generosity worthy of a better cause, leaving the jars open on the sink. My silk blouses, which I wore for the most important business meetings, she took for her videos and returned them stained with makeup. Even my emergency cash stashes, which I kept in a dresser drawer, mysteriously disappeared. And when I tried to confront her about it, she just brushed it off. "I needed it urgently for a taxi. I'll definitely pay you back." The money, of course, never returned. Mom was not far behind. She established her own regime in the kitchen, completely overhauling my perfect order. My neat cabinets turned into a chaotic jumble. She shamelessly threw out my food containers, declaring they took up too much space, and replaced them with her collection of mismatched plastic tubs. She got rid of my healthy foods, disdainfully calling them rabbit food, and stuffed the refrigerator with cheap fast food and frozen dinners. She rearranged furniture without my knowledge. My once minimalist living room was cluttered with her knickknacks, framed family photos — I noted with bitterness that I wasn't in any of them — and tacky decorative pillows. "You should be grateful," she grumbled when I dared to object. "Not everyone has a family that wants to help them cope with loneliness. Before we arrived, you lived like a robot. Now it finally feels cozy and warm like a real home here." I hadn't been lonely. I had been absolutely comfortable and fine by myself. But now I was deeply unhappy within the walls of my own home. The financial side of life also began to crack. Utility bills crept up at an alarming rate. Madison's things included a whole filming studio, which caused my electricity bill to jump by $100. They were both home all day, constantly using either the air conditioning in the hot summer or the heating in the cold winter. The water bill doubled due to Madison's hour-long showers and Mom's endless laundry. Internet usage skyrocketed because of my sister's constant uploads and streams. and when I cautiously hinted at the possibility of sharing expenses, Mom looked at me with such horror, as if I had suggested something sacrilegious. "We're family, Charlotte. Families don't charge each other for shelter. Besides, we're going through a rough patch, and you have such a wonderful job. You can easily handle all this." The 3 months we originally agreed upon came and went irrevocably. They showed not the slightest sign of preparing to leave. When I timidly reminded them of this issue, Mom would immediately burst into tears, start complaining about the impossibility of finding affordable housing, assure me that Madison was on the very brink of dizzying success on YouTube, though she still had only 500 subscribers, and beg for just a little more time. Then followed a series of events that crossed all conceivable boundaries of audacity, turning my existence into utter hell. Madison, as if forgetting she was in someone else's home, started bringing guys over, different ones, changing with kaleidoscopic speed every few weeks. These strangers heartily consumed my groceries, shamelessly used my Netflix subscription, and looked at me with a silent question, as if I were an accidental guest. One of them, a smug type named Brad, once asked with genuine bewilderment, "So, do you live here too?" Madison laughed at what she thought was a funny joke and tossed off lightly. "Unfortunately, yes, that's my sister. She's kind of a total loser, but she pays all the bills, so we have to put up with her." Mom, in turn, invented a new way of invading my life. She started opening my mail. I would find opened envelopes with bank statements and credit card bills on the kitchen table, eloquently unsealed by someone else's hands. And when I, mustering courage, tried to talk to her about it, she looked at me with cold contempt and declared, "I am your mother. I have every right to know about your financial affairs. And to be honest, Charlotte, you are acting incredibly selfishly. You have untouched savings just sitting there, while your sister and I are struggling to survive. For a Christian, this is more than unworthy." And then came that Sunday morning that turned everything upside down. I was trying to take refuge on the balcony, my last tiny bastion of peace where they never went, and enjoy a cup of morning coffee, when Madison suddenly appeared, beaming like a Christmas tree. "I'm pregnant," she squealed, and her voice sounded like a gunshot. Mom literally jumped up from the sofa where she was watching my new TV, which Madison had bought with my money, and rushed to hug her daughter, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Oh, my baby, that's wonderful news. When did you find out?" she fawned. "Yesterday. Jake and I are so happy. We're getting married next month at the courthouse." Jake, that unemployed DJ she had been dating for a mere 4 months, who was crammed in with 3 roommates in Wicker Park and devoutly believed that cryptocurrency would make him a millionaire one day. The same Jake who, just last week, had demolished $50 worth of my groceries and, from his lofty position, lectured me that I should stop fixating on material things. Mom turned to me with that particular look that made my insides grow cold, a look that unmistakably foreshadowed a coming storm. "Well, Charlotte, this changes everything. Madison needs stability for the future baby now more than ever, and this apartment would suit them perfectly." "They are perfectly capable of finding their own housing," I retorted, my voice flat and lifeless. "Don't be ridiculous. A child needs a safe, clean environment. Madison needs this apartment." "You barely use it yourself because the two of you have taken over literally every inch of it." Madison shot me a vicious, withering look, demonstratively placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "You've always been jealous of me. And now you're jealous that I'm having a baby, and you'll die alone one day, surrounded by your stupid spreadsheets and pathetic savings account." I was at a loss for words. I just walked inside silently and locked myself in the bathroom, the only room from which they hadn't yet managed to remove the lock, and only because I had recently installed a new one myself, after Madison kept barging in on me during showers. On Monday morning, I was sitting at work, immersed in a quarterly report, when my phone rang. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again with manic persistence. On the 4th time, I answered. "Charlotte, I need you to listen to me very carefully, she declared in that condescending, I'm the parent and I know best tone she mistakenly believed still worked on me. You will transfer the deed of the apartment to Madison. She's pregnant. She needs this housing much more than you do. You're still young. You have a great job. You can easily rent a room somewhere. Absolutely not, I replied, and not a single sound in my voice wavered. Excuse me? She said, clearly not expecting a refusal. I repeated, enunciating every word clearly. No, I spent 8 years of my life to buy this apartment. I am still paying the mortgage on it. Madison and Jake are adults. Let them find housing like proper adults do. You ungrateful little leech, she screamed into the phone. Yes, actually screamed, and her shrill voice was filled with such hatred that I flinched. Colleagues looked up at me in surprise. I hurriedly went to a conference room to escape prying eyes. After everything I've done for you, you've always been jealous of Madison. Always. Jealous that she's prettier, more talented, that she's loved more. You're just a bitter, envious witch who can't stand her own sister's happiness. I hung up, unable to listen to these insane accusations. That evening, I drove home with a heavy, cold lump in my stomach. A growing sense of dread inside me warned that something was wrong. When I pulled up to my building, George, the concierge with whom I'd become acquainted over the past months, looked at me with an awkward, guilty grimace. Ms. Chen, there was a bit of a commotion here this afternoon. Your relatives were carrying out a lot of boxes. My heart went cold. I almost ran to the elevator, frantically pressed the button for my floor. When I burst into the familiar hallway, I saw them. Boxes. My boxes. All my clothes, books, personal belongings, everything I had was rudely packed into cardboard boxes and placed outside the door of my own apartment. With a trembling hand, I tried to insert my key into the lock. It didn't fit. The lock had been changed. The door swung open, and standing on the threshold like triumphant conquerors were Madison and Jake, both with smug, brazen smirks, as if they had just hit the jackpot. What the hell is going on here? Burst out of me, and my voice, low and shaking with rage, sounded alien. This is our apartment now, Madison proclaimed with theatrical pathos, stroking her still completely flat stomach. Mom said you graciously agreed to let us have it for the sake of your future nephew. Very sweet of you, sis. I never agreed to anything of the sort, I retorted, feeling cold steel resolve hardening inside me. This is my apartment. I am its sole owner according to all laws and documents. Jake took a step forward, trying to strike a threatening pose, which, with his slight build and height of about 5'5", looked ridiculous and pathetic. Look, your mom warned us you'd be stubborn, but the decision is final. You should think about the baby. Stop being a complete selfish bitch. Get out of my home immediately, or I will call the police, I stated, and every word fell like a stone. Madison laughed. That same poisonous, prickly laugh she had perfected in high school and which always foretold trouble. Go ahead, try it. Mom will explain everything to them. She'll say you let us stay here yourself. It'll be our word against yours. 2 against 1. 3, if you count Jake. And besides, what kind of person throws their pregnant sister out on the street? How do you think that will look to the police? How do you think that will look to everyone? Behind them, Mom appeared, imposingly crossing her arms over her chest. Her face was contorted in a grimace of righteous anger. Charlotte, stop this disgraceful spectacle. Perhaps you really should see a therapist to finally sort out your memory problems, your pathological jealousy, and your uncontrolled aggression. With these words, the door slammed shut in my face. I stood in the hallway for probably 30 seconds, immersed in a state of complete, almost trance-like shock. Then, acquiring a strange, chilling calm, I methodically gathered my boxes, took the elevator down to the lobby, and asked George to help me load them into my car trunk. He, the old wise concierge, asked no unnecessary questions. His eyes held only silent understanding and sympathy. I drove to the nearest Holiday Inn, rented a room for the first night, and barely crossing the threshold, dialed the police. I'd like to report an illegal lockout from my residence, I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly even. There are unauthorized individuals in my apartment who have changed the locks and refuse to leave. Are they current residents? The dispatcher clarified. They were staying with me temporarily as guests, but I am the property owner. They have locked me out and changed the locks without my knowledge or consent, I explained. A patrol unit will be dispatched, he assured me. The next morning at 8 sharp, I met 2 officers at the entrance to my building. I had a whole portfolio of documents with me: the property deed, recent mortgage statements, bank reports clearly showing the origin of the down payment funds, my ID with my address, and even correspondence with the management company confirming my status. We went up to my floor. Officer Martinez, the senior one, knocked firmly on the door. "Police, please open the door." Mom opened the door, already fully immersed in the role of a distressed, persecuted woman. Her face was streaked with tears, her hair deliberately disheveled, as if she had spent the whole night crying. "Officers, thank God you're here. This is just a misunderstanding, a family squabble. My daughter, you see, has had a nervous breakdown. She's trying to throw her own pregnant sister out on the street. What kind of person does that? Tell me." "Ma'am, according to the documents provided, this apartment is registered to Charlotte Chen. Are you Charlotte Chen?" Officer Martinez asked impassively. "No, but I'm her mother," she exclaimed, as if that fact overrode all legal norms. "In that case, you are required to vacate the premises. This is her private property. Any person present here without the direct permission of the owner is trespassing." Just then, as if on cue, Madison appeared, and her eyes instantly filled with fake, copious tears. Credit where credit's due. She was a brilliant actress. She even managed to induce mild hyperventilation, breathing erratically. "Please, I'm begging you, I'm pregnant. She's throwing her pregnant sister out on the street. I have no one and nothing. My child will be born homeless. What kind of monster is she?" Officer Martinez remained unshaken. "Ma'am, you have exactly 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and leave the apartment. Otherwise, you will be arrested for unlawful entry." Madison's tears vanished instantly, as if they had never been. Her cute face contorted with genuine animalistic rage. "You'll regret this, Charlotte. You'll rot in complete loneliness and no one will care. No one will come to your pathetic funeral." "Keep it up, ma'am," Officer Martinez countered coldly, "and you'll have 30 minutes, not an hour." When they finally gathered their belongings, scattered all over the apartment, Mom stopped right in front of me. The officers watched vigilantly, depriving her of the opportunity to do what her rage-contorted face so eloquently screamed she wanted to do. Instead, she leaned sharply towards me, and her whisper, burning and poisonous, hissed right in my ear. "You are no longer my daughter. I have only one daughter, and it's not you. Never, hear me, never dare to contact us again." Madison, passing by accompanied by Jake, who was bending under the weight of her countless boxes, tossed over her shoulder, "I hope you're incredibly happy in your impeccably empty apartment with your equally meaningless and empty life. At least I have people who truly love me." Her voice was sweet as syrup, but her eyes shot daggers. "Yes, people who love you so selflessly that they gladly let you parasitize them for years," I retorted, unable to suppress the sarcasm. She flushed, a deep blush coloring her cheeks, but finding no retort, just snorted and proudly proceeded to the elevator. That same day, barely recovered from the nervous shock, I called a locksmith and ordered the installation of new, high-security locks, the kind that cannot be picked or forced without special equipment. I changed my phone number, blocked them forever on all social media, informed the building security that my mother and sister were now persona non grata, and gave George their clear photos for reliability. I naively thought the nightmare was over. I was cruelly mistaken. The very next day, my new phone started ringing off the hook. Unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Then text messages started pouring in, one after another, like a hail of poisonous arrows. "This is Aunt Patricia. Your mother told me the whole truth about what you did. How could you sink so low? "Charlotte, this is Uncle Tom. You must apologize to your mother immediately and fix this. This is your cousin Janet. I can't believe you threw pregnant Madison out on the street. You're disgusting." The calls and messages didn't stop. I had to turn off my phone completely to focus on work. However, that same evening, there was an insistent knock on my door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a whole delegation: Aunt Patricia, Uncle Tom, and my maternal grandmother. I didn't open. They stood at my door for a good 20 minutes, pounding with their fists, shouting and trying to shame me into coming out. Finally, George politely but firmly called them and informed them they were disturbing the peace and bothering other residents, after which they left, loudly indignant. The next day at work, our secretary approached me, her face showing slight embarrassment. "Charlotte, there are some people asking for you in the lobby. They say they're your relatives." With a heavy feeling, I went out to the public area. There, in the middle of the lobby, in front of colleagues passing by, stood Uncle Tom, Aunt Patricia, and my cousin Mark. They had come to my workplace. "We need to discuss the monstrous thing you've done," Uncle Tom declared loudly for the entire hall to hear. "Threw your own pregnant sister out on the street. What kind of person does that make you?" "This is my workplace," I said quietly but clearly, feeling my face burn with shame and anger. "You need to leave immediately." "We're not moving until you come to your senses and act humanely," Aunt Patricia chimed in. "The child needs a home, a roof over its head." In the end, security approached and escorted them out, but the damage, alas, was done. In the office, people glanced at me furtively, and whispers behind my back became the constant background of the day. My boss couldn't be faulted for a lack of tact, but he was forced to call me in. "Charlotte, I'm not delving into the details of your personal life, but such incidents should not affect the company. Please sort this out." The relatives, however, did not let up. My cousin Janet found me at the gym. "I specifically joined here to talk to you," she declared, approaching my treadmill. "It's time for you to come to your senses and fix everything." In response, I simply put in my headphones and turned the music deafeningly loud, staring at the wall in front of me. Uncle Richard went even further, calling my direct work line. "It's an urgent family matter," he told our unsuspecting secretary, and she, out of habit, put him through. "Charlotte, your grandmother is so upset she can't eat. Because of you, she might end up in the hospital. Is that what you want?" I silently hung up and immediately filed an official complaint with HR about harassment. 2 weeks after the eviction, a letter arrived for me at work. It was from Mom, but it felt like she had help making the text appear formal and legitimate. "Dear Charlotte, your recent actions have caused irreparable damage to the health and mental state of your sister and her unborn child. As your mother, I am forced to officially demand that you reconsider your inhuman decision. Madison is pregnant and extremely vulnerable. Jake, unable to withstand the stress you have brought upon our heads with your behavior, has left her. Now she is all alone, frightened, and defenseless. Your aunt and uncle, moved by compassion, have provided us with temporary shelter, but their housing is categorically unsuitable for an infant. At the same time, you have a 2-bedroom apartment which you, with incomprehensible selfishness, occupy alone. If there is any humanity left in you, you will contact me immediately to arrange for Madison's return to the housing that is rightfully hers by moral law. If not for your sister's sake, then for the sake of your innocent nephew who did not ask to be born into such a heartless family. I have always loved you, despite your difficult character, your eternal jealousy, and accumulated resentments. But what you have done may be beyond all forgiveness, unless you rectify the situation immediately. Your mother." I didn't finish reading it. The letter, uncrumpled, flew into the trash can. About a month after I reclaimed my apartment, my cousin Beth showed up at my office unannounced. We'd always maintained a semblance of neutrality, even a slight friendliness, though we never shared confidences. She was one of the few who hadn't yet unleashed a torrent of condemnation on me. She stood in the doorway of my office, shifting from foot to foot, her face showing unconcealed embarrassment. "Your mom? She asked me to talk to you. she said quietly. And against the voice of reason, I, grudgingly, decided to hear her out. From her confused, disjointed story, a bleak picture emerged. It turned out Madison and her beloved Jake had rented a one-bedroom apartment in Cicero, a depressed area a good hour and a half by public transport from downtown. Jake had pompously promised to find a job and support the young family, but less than 2 weeks after moving in, he solemnly announced that he was morally unprepared for fatherhood, after which he gathered his meager belongings and fled to Los Angeles to make it in his music career. He had blocked Madison's number right in the airport terminal before boarding the plane. Left alone at 3 months pregnant, Madison tried to return to Mom. But Mom, being fully convinced she would now live with me permanently, had terminated the lease on their previous home, which by then had already been handed over to new tenants. As a result, Mother rented a tiny studio in a troubled part of Rogers Park, for which she paid $200 more than for the previous place. And now Madison was crammed on her sofa. Your mom is literally killing herself working 2 jobs at Target just to make the rent. Beth's voice trembled. Madison can't work because of constant nausea. They are living hand to mouth. Mom wanted me to ask if you've changed your mind, if you'd let them live with you, at least until the birth? No, was my response, cold and even, without the slightest hesitation. Beth left, and I naively thought again that this was the end of it. However, 3 months after the eviction, there was another insistent knock on my door. This time, my grandmother was on the doorstep. She was 78 and had apparently made the long journey by bus to get to my home. Through the peephole, I saw her, small, stooped, incredibly tired. "Charlotte, I beg you, I'm too old for all this wandering. Just let me in. Talk to me." I almost turned the key, my heart clenching with aching pity. After all, this was my grandmother. She had been kind to me in early childhood before her heart, too, was completely occupied by Madison. I opened the door, but didn't step aside to let her in. "May I just sit down for a minute?" she asked, and genuine physical pain was audible in her voice. "My old knees can't take it anymore." I silently led her inside, but didn't offer tea or water, remaining on the threshold of the living room. "Your mother is having a very hard time," she began, sighing heavily. "She is still my daughter. I can't help but try to help her. But Charlotte, what she did with the locks, that was wrong. I told her straight out that it was too much." Her words struck me. "Really?" I couldn't help asking. "I may be old, child, but I haven't lost my mind. You bought this apartment yourself. It's rightfully yours. But baby, Madison is going to have a baby soon. Your own nephew. Does that really mean nothing to you at all?" "It means," I replied, and my voice sounded hard, "that Madison should have thought about that before trying to steal my home, before allowing an unemployed DJ to have unprotected sex with her after 2 months of a fleeting acquaintance." Grandma winced, as if from bitter medicine, at my direct, crude formulation. "You've become very hard, very bitter." "I've become a realist, Grandma. Mom made her choice again and again over 30 years. She consistently chose Madison. Now she will have to live with the fruits of that choice." Grandma left, and later I heard through the grapevine that she had told the family that I was impossible to reach. 6 months have passed since the day I closed the door on my family for good, and during this time, a fragile but priceless peace has settled in my apartment, like the quiet, transparent morning air after a long storm. I come home and am greeted by blissful, healing silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. I cook what I like, without fear that it will disappear in an instant. I watch movies I've chosen myself, and I fall asleep in my own, finally reclaimed bed, stretching out full length and not hearing other people's conversations through the thin wall. I started dating a man named David, whom I met at the gym. He is kind, psychologically stable, has his own apartment, and most importantly, his life is free of the toxic drama that poisoned mine for years. He has no insane family eager to take over his property, and no shadow of expectation that I must save him from the consequences of his own poor decisions. Last week, in my mailbox, someone in the family must have leaked the address. There was a new letter, this time sent to my home address. It was from Madison, handwritten, and the handwriting, once confident and sweeping, now seemed uneven and weak. Charlotte. I had the baby, a boy. I named him Jaden. He is incredibly beautiful, though, unfortunately, looks most like Jake, but no less precious to me for it. Right now, we are living in a homeless shelter. Mom couldn't keep up the rent for the studio anymore. The shelter is utter hell. It's full of drug addicts. There are constant fights, and I'm terrified for my son. Jaden deserves so much better. He's not guilty of anything. I fully realize I said terrible, unforgivable things to you. Please forgive me. At the root of it all was simple, soul-corroding envy. You always had a head on your shoulders, and I was a complete failure. For years, Mom instilled in me that I was special, that I deserved the best of everything without any effort, that fate would simply decide everything for me. But life turned out differently, and instead of looking truth squarely in the eye, I tried to take what you had worked so hard to earn. I'm not asking to come back to you. I understand that bridge is burned to the ground. But I beg you, could you help us with the deposit for at least a modest place for Jaden? He is completely innocent. Madison. I reread these lines 3 times, feeling the familiar bitter lump rise in my chest, a mixture of pity, guilt, and cold fury. Then I spent several hours at the computer, searching online for homeless shelters in Chicago, until I found the one in their area that accepted families with children. I dialed the number, introduced myself as an anonymous donor, and paid for 2 weeks' stay for them in a cheap motel. Not a luxury one, of course, but still a place safer than the state shelter. I didn't give my name. That was all they would get from me. 2 weeks, a short time for them to figure something else out, to find a way. And it's still more than I got when I was sleeping on the sofa in my own apartment, hearing insulting reproaches and accusations of parasitism directed at me. Yesterday, I made another mortgage payment. Only $162 remain. I marked the occasion with a fine dinner at RPM Italian, an expensive steakhouse downtown, a place I would never have allowed myself to enter in those years when I was saving every penny. I ordered a juicy bone-in ribeye and a glass of aged red wine, savoring every bite and every sip without rush or guilt. I took a picture of my dinner and posted it on Instagram with a simple caption, "Grateful for my peaceful life." In less than an hour, a direct message appeared from a fake account with an empty avatar, but I easily recognized the author. Must be nice to stuff your face with steak while your little nephew doesn't know if he'll have a roof over his head tomorrow. Hope you choke on it. I blocked the account without a second thought and returned to my dinner. The steak was truly exquisite. Perhaps from the outside, someone might consider me a heartless cynic. Someone will undoubtedly say that family is sacred, and I must forgive them, open my heart, and home to them. But those people have likely never found themselves in a situation where their own belongings are thrown out onto the street by those who demand help the loudest. They probably don't know what it's like to work 70 hours a week for 8 long years, only to have someone try to steal what you've built with such difficulty. I am not heartless. I have simply, through bitter experience, learned a simple truth. Sometimes the most important and necessary action is to protect yourself from those who, by right of blood, should love you, but do not. And sometimes the only path to peace of mind lies through resolutely letting go of those who bring only chaos and destruction into your life.